Alright, so sadly, the camera ran out of battery. So actually I completely got done with the changeover before I realized that, so I put it back to the way it was so I can show it on video. I think the video is going to stop somewhere right before I get the timing cover off. I have already gone ahead and cleaned up the gasket surfaces. I'm trying to think something else I've done. I'm mostly just going to show you the changeover of the parts. What we're concerned about is everything behind this cup right here. Here are the replacement parts right here. Actually, I think this is the original cup off of the engine, so I'll have to get that back. Have to swap that back in there. In fact, I know it is because it's got this little plastic bushing, and I'll explain that purpose of that bushing later. So a couple things with taking the timing cover off. Make sure you remove the key for the flywheel. That is very, very important. If not, you will ruin the seal on the timing cover. The timing cover looks pretty good. Probably what I'll do, I don't think I'm going to replace this seal. Watch, it'll probably leak like nobody's business, which will be unfortunate. I'll have to come back in here and do this again. But shouldn't be a big deal. So I'm going to set the camera up and we're going to do the swap over again. I'll go back to doing voiceover. So far I think I've spent about 3 hours on this project. I don't know how much of it I've videoed. Quite a bit I've videoed. So you know, this doesn't take very long. Now I won't be able to finish this project in one fell swoop because I'll have to order a oil pan, get it here, so it'll actually be just given my schedule traveling that I'm going to do a couple other things. It'll probably be 2 to 3 weeks before I actually get this engine back in the tractor. So hopefully once I get this part done, if you're waiting on this video, I know a couple people have requested it. If you're waiting on this series of videos, you can go ahead and figure out everything else. So yep, here we go. So once you have the timing cover off, there's a little clip there that I just removed. Sorry for the out of focus. The clip holds that bushing on that holds the flywheel cup on, if you want to call it the cup. You just saw me remove the flywheel or the flyball spacers. So those would be the fly balls. That's the governor. Those are the balls push out on the cover here. I just showed you the difference in the parts, and you can actually see where that tang fits in the little opening up there. And I'm putting the fly balls back into the governor. And then for the next about 6 minutes, I struggled putting that little C-clip back on the cam gear. And so I'll tell you a couple of things that I do while I'm struggling with this. And the funny part is, these things sometimes will go on really easy, and sometimes they're absolute pain, like this right here. The first time I did it, where the camera battery died, it went right on, and naturally when I actually am filming it, it did not go on, and I just dropped it. But anyway, a couple things to watch out for. Make sure you see I've got the engine actually tilted up a little bit. That keeps the fly balls in the spacer. Make sure when you put the fly balls back in, they're evenly spaced all the way around. That is a key thing. If not, it'll be out of balance. And when I go to put the cover back on, you'll see a couple things that I do, namely that little plastic bushing, the 3 holes on the cup there. That actually has a dowel pin that goes in it. That keeps that cup from turning. You don't want that cup to turn with the engine. That cup just kind of is stationary and held in. And in the next part of the video, I'll actually slow it down, and you can see me do it incorrectly and then do it correctly. And here it is. I'm still fighting with the C-clip. If you can't tell, this is a pretty straightforward, simple procedure. Certainly not a big problem to do this. So just basically the little C-clip is the hardest thing. So I just showed you that dowel and how I moved it over to the side. I'm going to go clean the timing cover off a little bit more. Do remember, if you notice when I dropped that C-clip, when it hit the floor, I actually went ahead and cleaned it all up. Because remember, these are the internals of the engine, so any dirt, debris, anything like that, you'll need it. I just tried to show you the part number for the seal, or the timing cover gasket, and clearly it was out of focus. One thing that I do want to note is that the governor shaft has a ball bearing in the bottom of it and the timing cover. So here it is. I'm taking the hammer kind of just lightly. Normally I would do this with a brass or rubber hammer, but that was the closest hammer I had, so there's very light taps. And you see that I'm having a little bit of trouble getting it on, and I'm going to slow the video down, and I'll come back and explain why here in just a second. Just pay really close attention to the sounds. So what I was testing for, as I mentioned previously, there's a ball bearing on the bottom of the governor shaft, and that's what the shaft rotates on. But also there's those two little tabs that come out on the governor shaft. Those are what the flyball cup presses out on to move the governor arm to control the throttle. What I was testing was the fact that cup can move in and out. If it is not centered on the dowel pin and the dowel pin is just holding it in place, basically there is no governor for the engine. And the way you can test that is actually, and you see I'm pointing at this right here, and I actually made a mark on the top of the plastic bushing, and it just needed a little bit more alignment. It's one of those things that you just kind of have to feel out, but by tilting the engine towards you, be very careful when you do that. By tilting the engine towards you, you can hear that cup hit the governor arm. And that's what I'm going to show in the next part of the video, where that cup, you can actually hear the fly balls moving in there and that cup hitting the governor arm. So hopefully you caught the differences in the sound there, and you can actually hear that governor cup on the second time that I put the timing cover on. So now it's just down to reassembly. That's pretty self-explanatory. It's just reverse of how you started it. Make sure, hopefully I put thread sealant on those bolts. I just thought about it. Yeah, there's thread sealant in my hands. Make sure that the bottom bolts, actually all of those bolts, have thread sealant on them because they do go straight into the crankcase. So you do want some type of sealant on there so oil doesn't come out of those bolts. There generally should be some type of evidence of sealant on there previously. So now it's just down to putting it back together. You can see that I'm going to sit there and everything's got to be torqued. I can't remember the torque spec off the top of my head. But then you put the ignition ring on there, this is a P series. Obviously, if it was a B series, then you wouldn't need to do that. You could just do the points. But if it has the ignition coil, you want to make sure you do that. Get the ignition ring in the correct direction. I think now I went off to find my torque wrench, and I can't remember what the torque spec is, so you'll have to look that up in CTM2. Now I'm cleaning the stator. I figure since I'm in here, I might as well clean everything up and get it clean and whatnot. So cleaning all that, inspecting the wiring harness and everything, make sure there's not going to be any shorts. Now you can put everything back together, and you notice I left that one bolt off, and that's because that one bolt on the timing cover, you see there, has the clip to hold the wire harness. Now I can put that bolt on, and I can finish torquing all of the bolts around the timing cover. This is a pretty simple project here. So now I have my torque wrench out. I want to say it's like 12 or 13 foot-pounds. It's not very much. You can see I'm dialing it in there. And, if you don't have a torque wrench, I would highly recommend going out and getting one. They're nice things to have. That way you're not warping parts and gaskets and everything. After I get these torqued down, now I can put the stator back on. Actually, I put the pickup on first. And I remember earlier in the video I mentioned putting the screws or bolts back in where they came out of. That's what I'm doing there with the pickup for the flywheel. This is the ignition pickup. So every time the flywheel goes around, it basically signals the spark through the coil. And so that's pretty simple. There should be a gasket that goes back there behind the pickup. Some of them have them, some of them don't. This one had the gasket, I believe, and so not really that huge of a deal, at least to me. There's probably some reason that the gasket's there, and most time I've put it back, but yours might not have one. So now comes the stator. The stator is always a pretty tight fit for some reason, so you actually do have to push on it pretty hard to get it to stay in there. After the stator, get that clamp down, and then comes the flywheel. The flywheel is one of those things you have to kind of do it the best way you see fit, and I'll explain that here in just a second. So I had to adjust the camera, evidently. Double check there's no torque spec for the stator. With the flywheel, make sure you line it up with the key. Also, the flywheel torque spec is 55 foot-pounds. If it does not torque to 55 foot-pounds, there's a possibility that the flywheel key can shear. So you see me putting the bolt back in there, and then you'll see me tighten it down as best I can, and then it's down to torque spec. Now you can do a couple different ways. You can use the front crank. I've done it that way, and you'll see I'll put a wrench on the front, or I guess the rear, however you want to think of it, at the engine, and then one on the flywheel end to see if you can get the 55 foot-pounds. But a lot of times I just end up using the fins on the flywheel to do that. Not necessarily something I would recommend, because if you break the fins off, I mean, that's obviously a $150 flywheel that you have to replace. So certainly something to consider depending on how you want to do it. There's some people use different methods to do it. 55 foot-pounds seems like an awful lot, and I think I ended up using a pry bar, and eventually I ended up getting 55 foot-pounds. So that's easy enough, and that's how it ends. Hopefully this video was helpful, and if you have any questions, leave them in the comments. Thanks for watching.